Every story we tell is a journey, a thrilling adventure that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing our community come together from all around the world. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Tomorrow, we have a special story just for you. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. See you on the next adventure. A rich girl disrespected a royal guard, and got the most humiliating lesson of her life. The streets of London were buzzing with tourists, all eager to witness the grandeur of Buckingham Palace and its iconic royal guards. Among the crowd, one person stood out, not for admiration, but for arrogance. Amelia Sinclair, 23 years old, was no ordinary visitor. She was the daughter of a billionaire, raised in luxury and accustomed to having everything handed to her without question. From a young age, she had been taught one simple lesson: money solves everything. Dressed in a designer coat, expensive sunglasses, and carrying a handbag worth more than most people's salaries, Amelia didn't blend in with the average tourists. She wasn't here for history or culture. She was here for entertainment. Alongside her were three of her closest friends, equally wealthy and equally detached from reality. They weren't sightseeing. They were looking for amusement at someone else's expense. As they walked past the imposing gates of Buckingham Palace, Amelia's eyes locked onto one of the royal guards standing at his post, tall, disciplined, and completely still. She let out a scoff. "Look at this guy," she said, smirking. "Just standing there, pretending to be important." Her friends chuckled. One of them pulled out a phone, already recording. "I heard they're not allowed to react no matter what," one of them said. Amelia's smirk widened. "Oh really? Well, let's see how far we can push him." She stepped closer, her high heels clicking against the pavement. At first, it was subtle, waving her hand in front of his face, snapping her fingers, making silly noises. The guard didn't even blink. Her frustration grew. "Seriously? He's just going to stand there like a statue?" she huffed. Then, an idea struck her, something far worse. She unwrapped a pastry she had bought earlier, took a bite, and intentionally let the crumbs fall onto the guard's pristine uniform. Still, no reaction. A mischievous glint flashed in her eyes. "Fine," she said. "Let's see how much he can really take." She grabbed her half-empty coffee cup and lifted it over the guard's head. The moment she tilted the cup forward, she had no idea she was about to make the worst mistake of her life. As Amelia tilted her cup, the last remnants of her iced coffee spilled down the crisp red uniform of the Royal Guard. The brown liquid seeped into the fine wool, staining the fabric. For a brief second, silence hung in the air. Amelia took a step back, a smirk on her face. She expected laughter, applause, maybe even a reaction from the guard. Instead, what she got was something she never anticipated: absolute horror from the crowd. Gasps erupted. People around her stared in shock, their eyes darting between the guard's now stained uniform and the arrogant heiress who had just crossed an unforgivable line. "Did she really just do that?" someone whispered. "Oh my God," another muttered, shaking their head. Parents pulled their children closer, sensing the weight of the moment. Tourists who had been casually taking pictures now had their phones raised for a different reason, recording Amelia's disgraceful act. Even Amelia's friends, who had been laughing moments ago, suddenly looked nervous. "Ah, Amelia," one of them muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "Maybe we should go." But Amelia? She was still enjoying herself. She let out a dramatic sigh and rolled her eyes. "Oh, relax. It's just some coffee." She reached into her luxury handbag and pulled out a 50-pound note, holding it out toward the guard with an amused smirk. "Here," she said mockingly. "Buy yourself a new one." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. This wasn't just disrespect anymore, this was an outright insult. But what Amelia didn't realize was that the royal guard wasn't the only authority present. A deep, commanding voice suddenly cut through the tension. "Miss, pick that up." Amelia froze. She turned slowly, her stomach dropping as she saw a high-ranking palace security officer standing just a few feet away. His piercing gaze locked onto her, his expression unreadable, but the authority in his voice was undeniable. "You will clean up this mess. Right now. In front of everyone." Amelia laughed dryly, tossing her hair back. "Oh please. I can pay someone to." "No amount of money will get you out of this." The words hit her like a slap. The crowd shifted eagerly, phones still recording. This was not how Amelia expected things to go. And for the first time, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: fear. Amelia's smirk faded as the weight of the security officer's words sank in. The crowd, which had been murmuring moments ago, was now completely focused on her. Phones were still recording, and whispers of judgment filled the air. But what unsettled her the most was the royal guard's reaction, or rather, his complete lack of one. He didn't flinch, didn't wipe the stain from his uniform, didn't even acknowledge her existence. He simply stood there, his posture perfect, his grip on his rifle steady, as if her pathetic attempt to humiliate him hadn't even happened. And somehow, that was worse than any outburst. He had ignored her. Amelia had spent her entire life being the center of attention, whether it was at exclusive parties, high-end fashion shows, or luxurious getaways. People always noticed her. They always reacted. But now? She had thrown coffee on a man in uniform, insulted him, and even tried to buy her way out of it. Yet he still refused to acknowledge her existence. And the crowd noticed it too. "Wow. He doesn't even care," someone whispered. She thought she could humiliate him, but she's the one looking stupid now. Amelia felt her face heat up. For the first time in her life, she was the one being humiliated. Her hand clenched around the crumpled 50-pound note she had been holding. But now, it felt useless. Her money was worthless here. The security officer's voice broke the silence once more. "Pick it up." His tone was cold, firm, there was no room for argument. Amelia's throat went dry. She let out a nervous laugh, glancing around, hoping for someone to defend her, to step in, to do anything to get her out of this situation. But no one did. Even her friends had inched away, pretending like they didn't know her. Amelia's breathing became shallow. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be in control. But now, she was trapped, completely powerless, and for the first time, utterly alone. The security officer took a step closer. "Now." And that was the moment Amelia realized, she had no way out. Amelia's stomach twisted as the security officer's voice rang in her ears. "Now." The firm, unwavering command sent a shiver down her spine. The realization hit her hard, she wasn't getting out of this. Her fingers tightened around the crumpled 50-pound note, her last desperate attempt at buying her way out of trouble. But now, Standing under the scrutiny of dozens of tourists and the ever-watchful camera lenses, she knew money meant nothing here. A lump formed in her throat. She could feel the heat of embarrassment crawling up her neck, her perfectly planned day turning into a public spectacle she would never live down. The crowd shifted eagerly, people whispering and nudging each other. They weren't looking at the royal guard anymore. They were looking at her. Recording her. Waiting. Amelia's palms grew sweaty as she glanced around frantically. Her friends were nowhere to be seen. The security officer crossed his arms, his expression remaining cold. "Pick it up. Or we can make this a much bigger problem for you." Her heart pounded. She had no choice. Slowly, for the first time in her privileged life, Amelia Sinclair bent down. She clenched her jaw as her manicured fingers touched the cold, dirty pavement, grabbing the soggy napkin that had fallen with the coffee. Whispers turned into quiet chuckles. Someone nearby muttered, "Looks like Princess finally has to do some work." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Amelia's face burned. She quickly grabbed another piece of trash, her movements stiff, robotic. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. She didn't dare look up. She couldn't. She never should have done this. Her entire life, she had been untouchable. But today, standing under the towering presence of the royal guard she had tried to humiliate, forced to clean up her own mess like a commoner, Amelia had never felt smaller. And the worst part? The guard never even acknowledged her. She had thrown coffee on him, insulted him, laughed at him, and he never once looked at her. Because to him, she wasn't even worth his attention. And that truth shattered her more than anything else ever could. As Amelia reached for the last piece of trash, her fingers trembled. She could hear the muffled laughter, the whispers, the quiet judgment from the crowd. Her breathing was uneven, her pride crushed under the weight of her own arrogance. Never in her life had she been so utterly humiliated. She had walked into this place thinking she was superior, believing that her wealth and privilege made her untouchable. Now, she was on her knees in front of hundreds of people, cleaning the ground like a servant. And still, the royal guard hadn't moved. He stood in the exact same position, rifle in hand, gaze fixed forward, his uniform stained with coffee, a reminder of her disgrace. And the worst part? He never even looked at her. He hadn't reacted when she mocked him. He hadn't flinched when she threw coffee on him. He didn't even acknowledge her as she scrambled to fix the mess she had made. Because to him, she wasn't worth reacting to. And that was a humiliation far worse than anything she had ever experienced. She had been raised to believe she was important, special, above others. Yet here she was, completely powerless. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Amelia finished. She stood up, brushing off her designer coat, her hands shaking. She dared to look up at the security officer. He said nothing. He simply gave her one final look, one filled with silent disappointment. Then, without another word, he turned his back on her. That was it. No dramatic exit. No yelling. Just a quiet, cold dismissal. And somehow, that cut deeper than anything else. Her face burned as she pushed through the crowd, head down, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Her so-called friends were gone. They had abandoned her the second things went south. And now? She was alone. She had come here thinking she could mock a soldier and get away with it. She left knowing she would never escape the shame of what she had done. And behind her, the royal guard remained at his post, unmoved, unshaken, an unbreakable symbol of discipline and honor. Do you think Amelia deserved this public humiliation? Or do you think she should have faced even worse consequences? Let us know in the comments. If you support the discipline and dignity of the royal guards, hit the like button and share this story. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of honor, duty, and those who dare to test the limits.